What is up, YouTube? My name is Trinity and welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you've been here before. Today we are going to be talking about something a little different than my normal videos. Normally I'm talking about either true crime cases or cryptids or kind of weird stuff like that, but today I'm going to get a little more personal. I'm going to be telling you about my favorite horror movies. So I initially had this idea for a video when I was coming back from my surgery. I had taken, I think, 5 or 6 months off of YouTube just because my recovery after surgery was so challenging and I just wasn't in the headspace to do much at all. And the reason I thought of it was, even though it's not typically what I cover, I don't really talk about horror movies, even though I know I still have to do the video about the Dear David movie. I normally don't go into like horror media, but I had this idea because last year I had my surgery in October, and of course, you know, spooky season, there's haunted houses and festivals and parties and all sorts of stuff that I love to celebrate. It's my favorite season after all. I'm that spooky chick for a reason. But all I could do while recovering was watch TV. While my nana was with me, she knew that I was very bummed out about, not being able to do any Halloween stuff. So she turned on these baking shows that had like Halloween themes. So people making cupcakes and cakes and whatever else. And they look like haunted houses or monsters or just weird, gross stuff. And I quickly got burnt out on all of them because I couldn't stay awake a lot during my early recovery, so I would go to sleep listening to it and then wake up like 3 episodes later, and I just got sick of it so fast. And then when Halloween actually came around, I was very, very upset because I couldn't even dress up around the house because I had this big cast on me and I was just miserable. But the one thing that I could do that you could say was celebrating Halloween in a way was watching horror movies, even though I do that all year round. So these horror movies that I'm going to talk to you about today are my favorite. I am by no means saying that they are the best horror movies or that they're even good. I'm just going to give my reasons why I personally love them and why I think maybe you should give them a watch if you haven't. So the first movie that I'm going to be talking about, which is number 5 on my list, so the lowest rated even though it's still in my top 5, is Dark Skies. So Dark Skies came out in 2013. It only had 41% on Rotten Tomatoes, so it wasn't rated very good. Horror movies rarely are, but this one wasn't very good. But despite this, I really loved it because it was a unique take on a very formulaic kind of movie. So the movie starts off very average for a horror movie, haunted house kind of stuff, mom, dad, and 2 kids live in a nice suburban home and weird stuff starts to happen. Weird noises, shit starts moving around, people can't sleep, having bad dreams, hearing weird stuff, alarms going off in the middle of the night. But stuff starts to ramp up and take a different direction when the mom, Lacey, wakes up one night and she goes to check on her kids and she sees this huge, non-human but humanoid figure just leaning over one of her kids, and then, it disappears. And from seeing it, you're like, but that wasn't a person. Usually if they're showing, a haunted house, it's either a ghost, which would be, humanoid, or a demon, but nothing in this is yet pointing towards demonic activity or anything. They're thinking haunted house at this point. The younger son, Sammy, starts to have these weird marks all over his body, and he starts exhibiting signs of what are normally connected to abuse, like peeing his pants outside of the home, even though he's too old to be doing that. CPS gets involved, so there's a threat within the house that they can't see or understand, but then they also have eyes on them outside of the house. But when the family finally sits down and does their, research where they figure out exactly what's going on, instead of going towards hauntings and demonic possession and stuff, it goes towards alien abduction. The main evidence being accounts from all over the world of victims, these children that have shown all of the signs that are happening to their children suddenly end up disappearing, and the families talking about very exact circumstances, the marks and everything. And a lot of conspiracy theorists say that this is caused by aliens, specifically the Greys. Not to give away too much of this movie in case you want to watch it yourself, but I think the scariest part of this movie, in my opinion, is just there's no rhyme or reason for these abductions. They just happen. There's no certain traits that the aliens are looking for or whatever. There's no specific area of the world. It's just one day they're here and the next they're gone. The other chilling thing about the story is with all of the stories about all over the world, these different cases of kids going missing, it's usually the parents that get pinned for it. The ending is very satisfying because there is a twist that I'm not going to talk about, but let's just say you can figure out what the twist is going to be by listening very carefully to certain context that is given throughout the movie. And then the very end seems like it's going to build up to a sequel, and I really wanted a sequel personally. It just keeps your mind racing about what comes next after the screen goes black, but unfortunately there's never been a sequel to it. Number 4 on my list is The Last Voyage of the Demeter. So this one may be controversial. I think it came out a year or two ago. However, it didn't do very well, even though I thought it was going to be so well received just because of the unique concept. I'm absolutely not saying that this movie is without flaws of any kind, because there are definitely some flaws, and it showed way too much in the trailer, which killed a lot of the suspense, unfortunately, but it was still a very unique story. I think the thing I like most about this movie is how different and unique the setting is to really any other horror movies we've gotten. I mean, now they're starting to go back into more time period horror movies, like they're going back a little bit, but to my knowledge, there haven't been too many. It's usually modern day for, whenever the movie is released. It's usually, a residential setting or middle of the woods, or that's usually the main two we get, or residential setting in a small town, or there's not a ton of variety when it comes to horror movie settings. This one takes place on a ship, middle of the ocean, so there's already the sense of isolation. I don't like water, like there's no sea monsters or anything in this movie, so it's not gonna get everyone, but it made me feel very unsettled because when the people realize they're trapped on a boat with Dracula, the movie is based off of a chapter from Bram Stoker's Dracula, how he gets to England and everything, but for the people that are like me and don't like open water, don't like being so far out that you can't see land anywhere, that adds to the feeling of isolation. And also just being on the ship, below deck, they don't have electricity, so most of it's going to be pitch dark. You might have like a torch or a lantern or something, but most of it's going to be dark, and you're dealing with a vampire. And I wish they would have used it more, but they had this little trope in the trailer where the way that sailors would communicate was by knocking on the side of the boat, and that would kind of give signal to people on the other side of the boat or below deck. Like, they would convey messages to each other that way. And I hoped it was a thing that would, like, take advantage of that to kind of lure people in. I feel like the tension could have been a lot greater because the beginning of the movie, people start realizing, like, what the fuck, all of our livestock is just dead, it's drained of blood. I wish it was drawn out a little more and there was more tension regarding, okay, we have less food now. And that could kind of rise tensions and create conflict between the characters before they figure out what is actually going on. Also, I love the depiction of Dracula because vampires have never really scared me in media just because they look like people. But my favorite kind of monster is humanoid and lanky. Crawling on the ground, that kind of shit. That is my worst nightmare when it comes to monsters. So just like the Wendigos in Until Dawn scarred me, Dracula has scarred me from this movie. Now, number 3 on this list, I think it released on either HBO Max or Netflix like a year or two ago. It's called Barbarian. Now, this one's good because it is so good at misleading the audience, and then it flips in the middle and you don't know where it's going, but then you see that it relates back to the main story. And again, I don't want to give too much away, but the misdirection is probably my favorite part of this movie. So in the beginning, the main character, I don't remember her name, but that's 99% of horror movies with me, unfortunately. I never know the characters' names, but this girl reserves an Airbnb in a seemingly rundown, abandoned neighborhood. So, red flag number 1. She goes up to the house and somebody's already inside, a random guy. Red flag number 2. They both try to call the owner of the Airbnb because there's obviously been a mistake because both of them were sent the code. Like, they both have evidence that they're supposed to be staying there that night. And then mistake number 3, she decides to stay there after the guy offers, like, hey, I'll let you have the bedroom, I'll stay on the couch. She takes food and I think wine from him, so red flag number 4. Like, the entire time you're screaming at her like, what the fuck are you doing? And you think this is going to be the main plot of the entire movie. but then other shit starts happening. Also, you're unraveling the mystery of what's happening at the same pace of the characters, so it keeps you very invested through the whole thing. You're like, oh my god, like this one thing that this person found, like it makes no fucking sense, like what does that mean, how is it related? And then again, it's not really a movie, I think, that you figure out ahead of time and then you're screaming at the characters like, no, don't go into the random room or whatever. You're like, why the fuck is this here? And you want to keep going. Also, not really a reason it's on the list, but I will say this is the first horror movie that ever made me scream out loud. Now, number 2 used to be number 1, and in my mind, sometimes I flip them back around. So these ones are about the same for me for different reasons. But for right now, number 2 is The Descent. Now, I've said at other points in time that The Descent is my absolute favorite horror movie, and that's why I still like switch it around with what's number 1. It holds a special place in my heart because it is like ideal horror movie monsters for me. Humanoid, pale, crawly things all over the place. That's all I'm going to say about that. I'm not going to tell you about the plot of why they are where they are. That's kind of something you unravel with the story. But essentially, a group of friends who like being very active, doing very athletic, outdoorsy type of stuff like whitewater rafting. They all get together. They're from the UK, I believe, but they come over to the US to have a little reunion and go cave exploring. They're doing this because one of their friends, the previous time they were all together, when they were whitewater rafting, right after lost her husband and her daughter. Now, one of her friends, it was implied that she's having an affair with the husband, so she feels extra guilty. She's trying to like suck up to the friend and make this a whole big trip about her trying to essentially like repair their friendship and stuff, even though it's never really discussed because it went from she's looking at her husband like, they're a little close, to her husband and kid are dead. Now, a lot of the initial horror in the movie is not the creature horror. It's all the setting, because I would never go in a cave, especially ones where you have to like crawl through little spaces, and in order to get through these spaces, like you have to take off your bag and push it ahead of you or something. I'm not claustrophobic. I love little cozy places, but I could never do something like that. I would never put myself in that situation because all I could think of is, oh my god, there's many millions of tons of rocks on top of me that could collapse at any second. But that's where a lot of the initial horror begins, but while they're exploring, trying to find a way out, they keep finding more evidence of something or someone else being in there with them. Well, it's mainly the main character. She says she sees a man in there, and then she sees blood. She sees really weird stuff that other people in the group are just kind of brushing off because, yes, she's traumatized. Yes, she's not mentally well. But she is seeing this stuff, but nobody's taking her seriously because of it. Now, what I did not know until I met somebody a couple months ago and we talked about this movie is that there are 2 different endings. So the main ending is one of the characters survives, makes it out, there's a weird jump scare at the end, and then movie's over. And then they have a second one, where there's a really contrived reason to go back down into the cave. That's apparently the US ending. The ending everywhere else was essentially the US ending. The one character gets out alive, but then wakes up and they're back in the cave. And they die in there. And so the second movie really doesn't exist. It can't exist. And I think the last thing that I like about this movie is that the characters aren't just being picked off one by one because of stupid choices. I mean, I'm sure some are if I think about it, but they actually try to fight back. Remember, they're exploring this cave. They have what can be used as weapons, like pickaxes, ice picks, that kind of stuff. So they are taking out the things coming after them, and they do fight them off. They're not completely helpless. And number 1 is called The Ritual. I don't think it released in theaters. I'm pretty sure it's another one that only released on maybe Max or another streaming service. But oh my god, it is an amazing movie. As I was saying before, the setting is chef's kiss. It is amazing. So a little backstory about me. When I was little, I used to go into this forest, this little state park with my papa, and it was like my safe place. Like, it was so warm, it was bright, it was full of colors. So I love being outdoors. I love camping, I love going in forests. This movie turns that on its head so badly. Kind of like the last movie, it begins on a traumatic note. There are 5 friends, 2 go into a liquor store, I believe, to, buy some booze. And one of them gets killed in a robbery, and the other friend feels a lot of guilt because he didn't step in, even though in that situation, like, I don't think there's anything he could do. It's not like he had a gun or anything, but his other friends kind of resent him for that. Now, before this happens, they were all planning a trip to, I believe it's Sweden where it takes place, to go through this long hike through this forest. And they decide to still do it, like, in memory of their friend, which is kind of why it's called the ritual. Like I said, the other friends kind of hold resentment towards the main character because he didn't do anything during this event, even though, again, he didn't have any weapons, and he's also very traumatized by it. And when they go into this forest, it is not like my childhood good memory forest. It is dense, it is dark, it is suffocating, and I don't know how to describe that besides, like, showing you pictures of the setting. It just feels like a place where I couldn't breathe. And it's not a place where, like, trees are kind of spread out so light can get in. It is very dense, it is dark, and you can't see anything but trees in the distance. Throughout the movie, while it's doing, the whole horror movie thing, like, it implies there's a cult around, and then there's the monster. It's also discussing issues of, like, trauma and guilt and how hard it can be to move past. But as things get more and more dire, as the thing that's hunting them is whittling down their numbers, the main character essentially has to decide that he deserves to live, that what he did, he has to let go of it because it wasn't his fault. He has to forgive himself. I'm not going to get any more into it than that just because I want you guys to watch it so bad if you haven't. It is an amazing horror movie. I know I said the other ones, like, you can argue whether they're good horror movies or not. This is a good horror movie. This is probably one of the best ones I've ever seen in my life, and that is the only one I'm going to say for a fact it is a good one. Not just that I like it, it's good. Or the last thing that I love about this movie is a lot of horror movies, when it comes to at least ones that take place in the US, it's based on either indigenous legends, so, Wendigo or other things I'm not supposed to say, or, like, Christian/Catholic beliefs. So, like, demons and exorcisms and that kind of stuff, or just the basic, haunted by a ghost or whatever. I don't know too much about Norse mythology, but this one goes in that direction, and I never expected Norse mythology to be associated with horror in my mind, but it is so refreshing to not just have, oh, it's the devil or it's a demon from hell. Like, it is something so weird and different and unique, or at least unique to me, because it's not something that I'm familiar with. And it's definitely something that I'm going to be watching again very soon. I've been wanting to watch it again since I first watched it, but it is an amazing movie, and I totally recommend you guys give it a watch. Before I go today, I just want to thank you guys so much for supporting and watching in my absence. It always warms my heart, and a bit less down on myself when I have to take breaks from YouTube for one reason or another. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to click the like button. It is the best way to support my channel just because it helps get my videos out to other spooky-minded individuals and helps our community grow. So definitely do that if you haven't yet. If you have a friend that you think would enjoy this video or any other videos on my channel, if they're also an enjoyer of all things spooky, be sure to share it with them as well. If you're not subscribed, please hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you'll be notified when I upload next. And finally, in the comments down below, please tell me what your favorite horror movies are. You can tell me your top 10, top 5, or just your favorite horror movie in general, because I really want to connect with you guys. I want to hear why you think that my picks are dog shit, or I want to hear why you think your picks are better and that I should watch them. I just kind of want to talk to you guys and see where our interests align, why other people like horror movies for one reason or another. But thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.